Welcome to the Explainer. So, we've got a prophecy, a currency that's basically worthless, and a whole nation at a boiling point. Today, we're going to peel back the layers on the crisis in Iran and really figure out what forces led to this massive upheaval.
All right, let's dive in. The year is 2026. Iran is basically a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. But here's the really weird part. Someone actually predicted it was all about to go down.
I mean, check this out. Just 1 month before everything kicked off, before the streets of Tehran just exploded, this British prophet makes this chillingly accurate prediction. So you have to ask, right? Was this just a wild guess, or was something else going on?
And man, did it happen fast. It's like the prophecy just came true right before everyone's eyes. What started as a pretty small protest by merchants about high prices, boom, it just spiraled into a full-blown nationwide uprising in a matter of days. And the regime's response? Well, they called their own people terrorists and then just unleashed this brutal crackdown, throwing the whole country into chaos. So what was the real spark here? What was that one thing that lit the fuse? Well, it was that feeling, you know the one, when your life savings just turned to dust right in your hands. It was the complete and total collapse of the Iranian economy.
I mean, just try to wrap your head around this. Living with 40% inflation year after year. It's like trying to climb a ladder where for every 2 steps you go up, you slide back 1. You're not just failing to get ahead, you are actively, constantly falling behind.
And this isn't just some number on a spreadsheet, right? It's like a silent thief that's constantly emptying your bank account, stealing your future, and making even a simple trip for groceries a source of major anxiety.
And just when you think, okay, it can't get any worse, well, it does. In the exact month the protests kicked off, the most basic thing you need to survive, food, suddenly became a luxury item. Prices for groceries shot up by a staggering 72% in just 1 year. Think about that. Your loaf of bread, a carton of milk, suddenly double the price. Look, this isn't just inflation anymore. This is hyperinflation. This is that terrifying moment when money basically loses all meaning and all that's left is desperation.
Yeah, this chart right here really tells the whole story. Just look at that last bar. In 2015, you needed about 32,000 rial to get $1. Fast forward to the end of 2025, you needed over 1.4 million. That's not a dip, folks. That is a straight-up nosedive into oblivion. The national currency, for all intents and purposes, had just stopped existing.
But here's the thing. A currency doesn't just collapse on its own, right? Something or someone has to be pushing it. And to figure out who's doing the pushing, we've got to look past the economy and dig into the real heart of power in Iran. It's theocracy.
So Iran's political system is, well, it's a paradox. On the surface, it has all the stuff that looks like a democracy. You know, elections, a parliament, a president. But when you get right down to it, it's a system where the voters might propose, but it's really one man who disposes. And this comparison here just nails it. The president? He might be the public face of Iran, but the supreme leader? He's the one pulling all the strings. He's got control of the military, the courts, the country's entire direction. For all intents and purposes, he's basically a monarch.
So you might be asking, how does the supreme leader hang on to all this power? Well, it's through a system that is just brilliant at creating the illusion of choice. You get to vote for anyone you want, as long as they've already been approved by the guy who's already in charge. It's like a race where the winner is picked before the starting gun even goes off.
And here's a rule of thumb. Wherever you find that much concentrated political power, you are almost always going to find a huge concentration of wealth too. And in Iran, the economy isn't just influenced by the regime, it's pretty much owned by it.
This is just a staggering number. Think about it. More than half of Iran's entire economy is controlled by just 2 groups. You've got the Revolutionary Guard, that's the regime's ideological army, and then these things called bonyads, which are these huge religious foundations. And get this, they answer only to the supreme leader and, this is the kicker, they pay 0 taxes.
So what's the result of all this? What happens when a tiny, unaccountable group controls more than half the country's money? You get a level of inequality it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. The top 1% of Iranians control
75% of the entire nation's wealth. Let that sink in. This isn't a system that's broken. It's a system that's working exactly as designed. It's built to funnel all the country's resources up to a tiny elite, leaving everyone else to fight over the scraps.
And of course, that's what fuels the kind of resentment that eventually boils over into the street.
Now, a system this entrenched, with this much oppression and inequality, it doesn't just pop up overnight. To really understand where it all came from, we have to rewind the clock. We need to go back to the revolution that created modern Iran and the key events that set the stage for it.
Really, the story of modern Iran boils down to two huge, fateful moments. First, you've got the 1953 coup, which was backed by the CIA. That single event basically taught generations of Iranians to never, ever trust the West. And then you have the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which, in the end, just swapped out one kind of autocratic rule for another.
Before 79, Iran was really a country of massive contradictions. On the one hand, you saw this secular, modernizing nation, a really important ally of the West. But on the other hand, it was a brutal monarchy, where all that oil wealth just made a tiny elite super rich, and anyone who disagreed with the government was ruthlessly crushed.
So the revolution wasn't just about politics. It was a total cultural reset. It basically slammed the door shut on decades of secularism and forced this strict religious code onto every single part of daily life. For millions of Iranians, especially for women and young people, it must have felt like time itself was suddenly going in reverse.
Okay, so let's recap. You've got this deeply corrupt, wildly unequal system. You have a population sitting on decades of grievances. It's a tinderbox. All it needs is a spark. And in the few years leading up to 2026, a whole series of external shocks came along and provided exactly that.
For years, Iran was just getting hammered by these crippling international sanctions and getting pulled into one expensive regional conflict after another. But the real final blow? That was a devastating, costly war in 2025. And to pay for it all, the government did the one thing you should never do. They just printed more money. That's what triggered the hyperinflation we talked about earlier, and it's what finally pushed the people right to the breaking point.
So where does all of this leave Iran? You know, the crisis of 2026 wasn't just about bad economics or corrupt politics. At its heart, it was about a fundamental, universal human desire for freedom, for dignity. As one observer put it, the universal gravity of an open society is insurmountable. But is it really? Can that gravity, that pull towards freedom, actually overcome a system that's been built on decades of entrenched power, wealth, and control? That right there is the question that's going to define Iran's future.